Hello and welcome to Tipsy Tolstoy, Russian literature for the inebriated.
I'm Matt Gerasimovich, PhD student in Russian Lit. This week, recovering from the plague that has descended upon my household.
How you feeling?
Like death.
Yeah, fair.
But I'm here.
So, is that really recovery? Or are we just making it through our time
No,
of
it's
sickness?
not recovery. I just kind of assume like at some point I'll be recovering. My nose hurts. I feel like I look like Rudolph, so it's fun.
Well, I'm Cameron Lalana, and I am now a boy with a commute. So if you have any audiobook recommendations, please send them my way. Otherwise, I will just go down the line of trashy sci-fi I currently have in my Audible all the way down to hell. So it's really a service to prevent me from going to the worst possible form of literature.
Sorry to our sci-fi fans. This is a podcast where me and my good pal Cameron get to unwind from our week with some Russian literature and a drink or two. This fine morning, we continue our journey through Tolstoy's War and Peace. We are doing part 2 of book 1, about the next 100 or so pages. Pretty good read. Pretty good read
If you are really into the intricate details of military tactics.
Yep, it's a military boy's part. I'll give you that much.
We've had peace. Now it's time for war.
Now it's time for war.
This series is only possible because of the support of our generous listeners who chip in a little bit every month over at patreon.com/tipsytolstoy. As a thank you to all of them, we're going to be hosting a monthly Patreon-only reading group to discuss more of the important passages we didn't get to cover in our episode. If you want to get the most out of this series and our podcast, take a look at patreon.com/tipsytolstoy. If you're not interested in Patreon but still want to help us out, you can leave us a nice review on Apple Podcasts or sign up for our email list on our website, tipsytolstoy.com.
Speaking of exciting things that we're doing now, we're on TikTok, finally. You can find us at Tipsy Tolstoy. I'm managing it, running it. It's kind of a personal hell of my own creation. So stop by, see what's going on.
It's been good. It convinced me to download TikTok, create an account, follow Tipsy Tolstoy, only Tipsy Tolstoy.
Only Tipsy Tolstoy, yep.
Yeah, it started to give me a lot of content on the For You page, and I got scared that it was... whatever it was doing. So I just followed us, and then I liked our videos and watched them and enjoyed them because Matt works hard on them. And then I left, but maybe I'll be enticed on. I hope not, but maybe.
I work somewhat hard on them.
There you go. That's the resounding check mark of quality you'll get from Tipsy Tolstoy content.
That's right. Follow us. We work a little hard.
Well, before we get into the reading today, Matt, I got to ask you, I know it's like 10 a.m. your time.
Yep.
But what are you drinking this morning?
So I joked about it last episode that I was going to ferment my own Koumiss.
Sure.
Because in honor of Tolstoy and his time in Central Asia when he was really into drinking, I don't know, like 1 million cups per day of Koumiss. It was allegedly for his health and all these other things. I think he just liked it. I do not have Koumiss. I have store-bought Trader Joe's kefir, which is just as good. Yes, it is strawberry flavored, but I got to tell you, it's 10 in the morning. Let me have my drink. It's non-alcoholic. It tastes like drinking a smoothie. It's great.
Do you think Tolstoy would approve of strawberry flavored Koumiss?
Oh, absolutely not. You know that he is a Koumiss traditionalist.
Yeah.
He's definitely fermenting it himself, or rather probably serfs are fermenting it for him.
Sure, yeah, that's the most likely possibility.
That's the Tolstoyan way. What are you drinking over there?
Well, as it is currently 8:15 in the morning, I am drinking... Well, I'm joined by our good friend, last name Joe, first name Cuppa.
All right.
So, it's getting ready. Get ready and energized for the day.
That's right. That's good. That's probably better than...
I think kefir might actually have more health benefits than if it's fermented.
It definitely does. I just mean better than alcohol.
Oh, yeah, that is in general true.
I just assume if you're drinking alcohol at 8:15 a.m. and then going to work later, that's probably not for the best.
Either that means your life's not going super well or you're very high functioning.
Yeah, which, hey, good for you.
Well, I don't know if we can endorse that one, but Tipsy Tolstoy,
maybe good for you.
We don't officially endorse drinking before you go to work.
No,
Just to make
not officially.
Only unofficially. Anyway, so part 2 of War and Peace. Like we said earlier, we've had enough peace. Time for war.
I am quite frankly sick and tired of peace.
Yeah, as are many of the characters in this book, and now they're
That's
having
true.
a great time.
Yeah.
Well, some of them. Okay, so now we're in Austria. We're joining General Kutuzov's army. As you recall, General Kutuzov is the leader of the forces who are being sent to fight the French. He's joining Austrian forces, so we are beginning this section with a long march of Imperial Russian troops. It's been 700 miles. They're ragged. But as soon as they get there, their officers get the order that General Kutuzov is coming to inspect the troops. So, make sure that they're ready from their march. And the officers are like, wait, do you want them as they are from the march, or do you want them in marching uniforms? And they decide, well, it's General Kutuzov. We'll put them in marching uniforms. So they throw them into their nicest blues. Everyone's after. They're tired. They've just literally they've been walking for 700 miles.
And they would also walk 700 more.
Yeah.
They would. They don't have to, but they would.
Yes, exactly. To be the man who walks beside you, something at your door. Da 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 da. So they're tired. They don't even have boots anymore, some of them, because again, they've walked so far. And so they get to preparing and they get up all in their nicest blues. And then an adjunct from Kutuzov comes and says, all right, they're still in their uniforms they had in their march, right? Because General Kutuzov is coming here at the Austrian forces and they want us to march and we don't want to. So we want to make sure our troops look really bad. And the regimental commander says, oh, yeah, definitely. No doubt we will have them. I mean, they're already in marching uniforms. Totally fine. They'll look really pathetic, which leads to a sudden orders to look shittier. For all of them, they're taking off their nice clothes and they're throwing on their greatcoats they've been marching in. It's a comedic scene. It's funny. And so after all that, Kutuzov arrives, and Kutuzov is trailed by, of course, Austrian generals, but also I should note our good friend and an adjunct to Kutuzov, Prince Andrei Bolkonsky. I'm just going to note 2 other people with Bolkonsky, 2 staff officers. One is named Prince Novitsky, and the other is named Zhirkov. Zhirkov is a bit of a jokester and is following behind another staff officer, mimicking him in all his motions, and eventually runs into Kutuzov when he stops during a conversation when he's inspecting the troops. Also inspecting the troops, he happens to find our good friend, formerly Officer Dolokhov, who has suffered actually more material consequences of the bear incident. As you may recall, Prince Krug,
the Great Bear Incident.
The Great Bear Incident of 1812. I assume. So he's been demoted after that incident, and now he's just a regular soldier. So he is trying to prove himself and tells General Kutuzov that he is ready to prove himself and earn his way back up into his staff commission. And now after Kutuzov acknowledges him, finally the old officers who he used to work with once again start acknowledging him, which he does not really receive too kindly, and declares to them that he will not be doing anything fun, essentially no drinking, no gambling, until he's once again an officer. Continuing on with our cast of characters for now, we go over to the Pavlogradsky regiment, which is a hussar regiment, where we find our friend Nikolai. Nikolai is, he's gotten used to military life and is having fun. We, in this scene, encounter a small scene where a lieutenant steals money from an officer that Nikolai Rostov is staying with. He goes after the man and accuses the guy of being a thief in front of a bunch of other staff officers, which is an embarrassment for the regiment. So he gets put under a lot of stress and pressure to recant his accusation.
I mean, it's true. It's just embarrassing.
Yeah, they're like, look, you just need to apologize so everyone knows we can maintain the regiment. And as the text tells us, these wise older men who had been in the regiment for so long know how to take care of the regiment, which is, of course, to say, sweeping things under the rug. It's an important part of any military command, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
um, so Kutuzov receives the Austrian generals, and he's trying to convince them that we know they're having this kind of verbal sparring game where they're really politely saying, "Hey, wouldn't it be better for you if this thing that I actually want you to do?" The other one says, "No, no, it would be so much better for you if we did this thing that was better for me." Which continues, and Kutuzov even tries to trick the Austrian general by saying, "Look, you think we're in an unfavorable position, but your General Mack has just won the battle. And of course, it's only rumors to you, but I have a letter from General Mack confirming it, that he is, on his way." And at that point, Prince Andrei Bolkonsky goes out to find some other things. And while he's out and finds Zhirkov and Nowitzki in the hallway, another Austrian general, unknown, looking wounded, joins them. They say, "Hey, you got to get out of here. Kutuzov is meeting with someone." And the guy says, "No, I have to meet with him right now." And they're like, "I think it can wait, buddy. Who are you?" And he says, "I'm General Mack. We've been routed." And then they say, "Oh, okay." And then they go and give Kutuzov some news I don't imagine he loves getting in the middle of trying to trick some other generals, which leads forward. And in the days following this, the routing of General Mack's forces, things are not going well for the war effort on the side of the Austrians and now some Imperial Russian troops. They're being pushed back at basically every junction, and they are retreating and retreating. They're fighting in their back lines whenever they get caught, essentially, when the French army catches up to them. And this continues until shortly before we follow that victory of the Imperial Russian troops. We also follow a scene where they're retreating across some bridges, followed by the French army, and we are treated to first Nowitzki getting stuck on the bridge before being rescued by a member of the Pavlogradsky Hussars as they are trying to set fire to the bridge to prevent the French from being able to cross. And they are successful despite taking a couple losses. Nikolai, for his part, during the setting fire to the bridge, panics a little bit and basically just kind of freezes up and spends most of the scene really neurotically, like, everyone notices I'm a coward. They all saw I wasn't doing anything. Not even paying attention to, hey, because they're being fired at by French cannons and some of them are being cut down, don't walk down the middle of the bridge. For even if you're not really a military genius, I think you can understand why you don't want to stand up, not next to any walls when you're being shot at by cannons.
Yeah, they wouldn't have been where I chose to stand.
Yeah. So following that, in which they do manage to set the bridge on fire with fairly minimal losses. Let's go back forward to that victory, and they say, "Oh, this is great! This is amazing! This is the first victory we've won." Andrei, you need to go tell the Austrian court, which is now based in Brune, because at this point Austria is under threat, and they've moved the emperor, the other courtiers, the leadership of Austria to this other town. Upon arrival, Andrei it should be noted, while he is on his way there, he feels great. He is just achieving all of his dreams. It said, Prince Andrei galloped along in a post-Britska, experiencing the feelings of a man who has long been awaiting and has finally achieved the beginning of the happiness that he has desired. So he's feeling great. He's on cloud nine, which lasts until they actually get to Brune and is finally admitted to see the Minister of War. And the minister says, "Yeah, look, that's great. That's horrible that you lost General Schmidt. We all love General Schmidt. Come back tomorrow. You can talk to the Emperor," and kind of sends him out. And now Andrei's good mood is totally ruined by, "All right, sure, just send me out." He's all over the place with his feelings about the matter. So Andrei joins the Russian ambassador in Brune, Bilibin, who is noted is, I think, quite funnily, not interested in the question why, but rather in the question how, generally, which is how he's managed to advance so far, having been a diplomat since he was just barely a teenager, or at least been serving in a diplomatic capacity, having been all over the world. And he welcomes in Andrei and, it says, "Look, don't take it too personally, but think about it. Austria is under threat. It may be taken at any time. A favorite general, General Schmidt, has been lost. Things are not going super well for them. They're retreating. This is not a really important victory. It's not something they're going to bring out all the stops and congratulate you on because, oh, great, the Imperial Russian army is here and they're retreating and they won one battle in their retreat. So yeah, they're not going to give you a medal. Just trying to be realistic about this."
Also, they didn't capture any generals or anybody important in that battle either.
Yeah, it was a battle of it was just a battle which, as the book notes, turned the morale of the troops around, which is great. But as of actual military significance, as Billy Bin says, it's not. There's not much there. However, when Andrei returns to the palace the next day, he actually gets quite the reception. There's a party. The emperor's there, although the emperor is quite awkward and just kind of asks Andrei a list of questions. And he even gets the sense that the emperor spoke with such an expression as if his whole goal consisted in asking a certain number of questions. So he's just going through a lot of rote technicals. You know, how many people did you capture? What was the size of your forces? How far is that from here? How long did it take? When did the battle start? So they actually give a fairly nice reception. He gets an award, and well, actually, the whole regiment is given awards, and he's kind of the one to take it to them. And things are going great until news comes that the French are approaching Brune. Also, they've taken Vienna. Everyone's freaking out because how did they take Vienna that fast? And as we find out later, it was through deception on the French part, where they managed to kind of convince them to let some envoys through, and basically a bridge that was supposed to be blown up to prevent them from being able to, if they took Vienna, approached Brune, they were able to be, they were occupied with some peace talks. French troops were able to remove the charges. So now everyone's in a panic and they're getting ready to go. And Bilibin who is like saying, hey, Andrei, I think you're pretty cool. If you go back to your troops, you're probably going to die. And before Andrei went to the emperor. He'd been hanging out with Bilibin's kind of little group, who I should note involves Prince Hippolyte Kuragan, who is one of the other members of the group who was part of the bear incident. Which, by the way, Kuragan is a diplomat now. Pierre is Count Bezukhov. And Rostov gets busted back down to an enlisted soldier. So two of the three of them failed upward after that one.
Yeah, it's really a story about failing upwards, I think.
That is, I think, much of the story of the Russian aristocracy. However, Andrei says, look, my place is with the troops. So he sets out despite not knowing exactly where they are and travels generally in their direction before he's finally able to make his way back to Kutuzov's forces. And he goes and finds them in pretty, unfortunate circumstances. Once he arrives, he finds even, people trying to retreat, military officers blocking people who have valid reasons for trying to retreat because they are trying to keep the soldiers from breaking. So, like, you find a scene of a soldier trying to prevent a doctor from going, which Andrei, involves himself in and makes the soldier go. And everywhere you go, especially after he links up with Kutuzov and they go to see the forces, it's just not going super hot for them. On the roadsides, one constantly saw now dead horses, skinned or unskinned, now broken down wagons near which solitary soldiers sat waiting for something. And now soldiers who separated from their detachment and went in groups to the neighboring village, or came from the villages dragging chicken, sheep, hay, or sacks filled with something. So the discipline is quickly falling apart. Andrei notes that this isn't really a group of soldiers, but rather a band of ruffians, more or less. And Kutuzov basically says, well, look, we don't have a lot of good options available to us at this point. Even he deploys a regiment to go hold off the French, and he appears fairly emotional at this point. And once they leave, the commander leaves, Kutuzov turns to Andrei and says, if 1/10 of that regiment comes back tomorrow, I will thank God. Which, not would you love to hear from your commander who's just deployed some troops,
No,
especially
not
if you're
a great
one of those
start.
troops. No, you don't really love that expectation. So, and looking at their options, they have a couple things they can do. They can stand and fight. They can retreat all the way back to Russia. They can try to link up with some other troops, although each comes with its own set of risks. And it ultimately decides, let's link up with other troops which are, closer to the Russian Empire, that we risk being routed. But hey, it's the best chance we got, at least he thinks. And he deploys another regiment led by a man named Bagration. His forces, or at least the French general assumes, this must be all of Kutuzov's forces. Will be so easy to destroy. Just a couple thousand ragged men. And he's waiting on some troops and says, look, I can keep him here probably if I tell them I'm starting a peace process, just, like we did to get, across that bridge outside of Vienna. And so he sends over the envoys and they start talking, and Bagration also sees and says, oh, this is perfect. I can hold them off for a couple more days. That's exactly what we want. So Kutuzov's forces can get further. And this kind of, they mutual trickery continues until Napoleon, entering first for the first time as an actual character in the form of a letter, writes to Murat and totally chastises him and says, who are you? You are not the commander of the French forces. You do not have the power to make truces. You, as a general, are there to command militarily. And I will be basically attending and finishing this problem up. Destroy the forces, right? End the peace process. Hi, buddy. For our audio listeners, my cat has decided to join. He's being affectionate this morning. So
the cat's name is Napoleon. The cat joined as soon as you started talking about Napoleon.
He does have a Napoleon complex.
Yeah, they tend to.
Yeah. So Murat, thoroughly chastised now, says, look, I don't remember if Napoleon says it, but he does not trust Murat anymore, if he trusts any of his generals, frankly, and decides to go and finish it himself. So Murat, who is not feeling great after that letter, says, I'm going to destroy them before Napoleon gets here, as sort of as a show that I can still lead. And while at this time, the Imperial Russian forces, no idea. They think the truth is still going on. Our friend, Prince Andrei, arrives as per his request from Kutuzov, and Bagration, he rides around the troops. They take assessments. They're but just waiting. Things are calm. Soldiers are eating food. Even at one point, in one regiment, which Dolokhovsky is serving in, they're within sight of the French forces and close enough that some of them are just kind of standing and staring at each other, looking at the weird foreign adversaries. And in fact, up in one place, Dolokhov is arguing in French with a soldier, and they are all their fellows are with them, kind of watching them yell at each other, until finally one of the Imperial Russian soldiers starts speaking in gibberish French, which leads both sides to break out laughing. And the narrator says it was such a laughter that seems after this they should have all unloaded their guns, put down their cannons, and gone back home. But of course, they didn't do that. While Andrei is just kind of surveying the troops and getting a sense and writing down notes and what he thinks they should do militarily, they come under sudden fire. At this point, Murat has gotten the letter and decided, I just got to go. And the French forces just start advancing. And, Kutuzov, excuse me, Andrei rushes back to, at this point, Andrei is speaking with Bagration, but the various officers are there. Officers who moments before were sitting around drinking or philosophizing, run out. They get ready to fight. The cannons get set up. Everyone is quickly getting ready to fight, but it's not a strong defensive line. And through the next section, we follow various vignettes of how the battle goes. Really, for the most part, Andrei following Bagration around, and Bagration giving orders, and mostly being told, General, we can't do that for this reason. We have to do this. And then Bagration going, all right, sounds good. To which Andrei notes that, in spite of the chance character of events and their independence of the commander's will, his presence accomplished a great deal, and that he seems to put everyone's minds at ease, and they are already being forced into their what their plans are, but somehow Bagration's presence and approving of what they're being forced to do seems to make them ready to do it, as if it was intentional. They even managed to go down into the fight itself on the right flank, where things are not going well. A regiment's been decimated by cavalry, and they managed to turn things around with not really so much their support, but their presence. When French forces arrive and the two lines, really decide to do the classic, for whatever reason, lining up, not for whatever reason, military tactics, lining up and shooting at each other. Tolstoy even putting in a footnote that, at this point, there's quite a heroic behavior of both sides as they looked nicely and stood in lines and began shooting at each other. Though the French don't shoot with discipline, which eventually with the support, although the unit that they're with is almost destroyed, the support of a southern unit emerging from the forest allows them to push forward and charge, and the right flank is saved. And now it's not so on the left flank in the forest, where we find the Pavlogradsky hussars where Nikolai is serving, and the two commanders there are not getting along. They're not talking about strategy, which makes it not ideal for a combat situation when you've got two different types of forces and they won't support each other. And so the troops are just in the forest. They're just fighting for their lives against the French troopers, including Nikolai, who gets shot off his horse. Well, his horse gets shot and he has to run, assuming he's dead. And as he's running, he's not even really paying attention to the battle. He's just looking at the world around him before finally he comes to some French troops. And, they say, like, okay, well, you're a prisoner now. And in a moment of bravery, Nikolai pulls out his gun and then he throws it at the soldier and then he bolts. Well, let me find the exact line. It was just so perfectly phrased. He seized his pistol and instead of firing it, threw it at the Frenchman and ran for the bushes as fast as he could. And he's freaking out about his arm, which isn't working right. And he's not loving things and is almost caught, but manages to make it away. And with the advance, or with the arrival of some other troops by Timokhin's regiment, they're able to turn the battle around eventually, but not after taking heavy losses, really. But still, for the time being, they forge Murat's forces back, and after that, they say, "All right, it's time to go." The cannoneers, the artillerymen, it's noted, I should say, they've been firing this whole time. They're having a great. They're cheerful. They lost 2/3 of their men in this out of 40 men. It said that at least when Andrei arrives to relieve them, 17 of them are dead of the 40, almost half. But later on, it said 2/3 of them died in the retreat eventually. But they, unlike everyone else who got orders to retreat, no one told them, and in fact, people supposed to defend them just kind of left them. So they've been frankly, were, as they note later on in an after action conversation with Andrei, probably the reason that the Imperial Russian forces are able to win, because they, through the whole time, just kept firing their cannons despite having no cover, despite being cut down by French cannons and French shot. And I should point out the leader, General Tushin, an officer. We follow his story for a while, and he sort of is a bit more philosophical, as we find before the battle. And during the battle, as he stands in the cannons, he has this great sense of imagination about how the fight is going, and it's all quite heroic and doesn't entirely match up to reality, but c'est la vie. And they fall back, and hey, it's enough of a victory for them. Individually, their forces are torn up. The cannoneers they find young Nikolai Rostov, who's just wandering around, his arm hanging limply, bloody, shell-shocked, and take him with him and kind of take care of him. And the rest of this part is, for the most part, just them in retreat and the experience of the various soldiers and the states they're in and the things they're taking are just leaving behind, and they're retreating, but it's not the worst outcome. And that's where we finish part 2 through of our great big warfare part, the first warfare part, with the introduction of Napoleon, which is exciting.
It's a good outcome, I think I would say, for them.
Yeah, it is. Well, yeah, for the surviving ones, that as good as they could have expected.
Yeah, I mean, they're able to hold off the French for a little bit and then kind of link up with the rest of the troops, and it's okay. It could have been completely everybody dead. So think about it.
Big ups. Yeah. Oh, I should also mention on the right flank, Dolokhov. Forgot to bring him back in. He's thirsty to get back his officer status. When they charge in to save the unit that's deteriorated, Dolokhov is running across. He's even he's chasing an officer. He captures him. He takes his sword. When I think it's Andrei, another officer, sees him later. He says, "Look, I've been busy essentially holding a French sword." He's wearing some elements of a French uniform. So he's out there. He's out there taking trophies, capturing officers,
showing off about it.
Yeah. Well, I get it. I mean, if you had, a bear incident, whatever that means to you, if you just had a bear incident and, 2 of your 3 friends left that bear incident, either a diplomat or incredibly rich, and then you got busted back down to private, I can see why you might have a little chip off your shoulder and want to get back up.
That would be tough.
Yeah. So, It's been 200 pages. This is so much happens, so many characters to follow. Oh, I didn't I didn't even mention Zherkov at the beginning. Nowitzki and Zherkov. Zherkov is a funny character. He's everywhere. Zherkov, after you first meet him, he gets busted down. He gets sent back down from the general staff into general officers, and then every time you meet him, he's now working for a new officer for whatever reason.
Yeah, there's a few of those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Makes sense. So, how do you walk away from part two?
Part two, I have questions about part two
Sure.
that I will pose because there's a few kind of threads that run between the war parts and the peace parts. And so, one of the clearest questions I think that anybody will have when they read War and Peace is why does Tolstoy divide at least these first two books, or rather the first two parts of book one, into peace to start and then war to continue? Why doesn't he just combine them into some sort of, I don't know, why doesn't he write it differently? Is it just the sequencing of the action? I don't think that's an adequate explanation because you could tell things through flashback, or there's other ways that you can get around the literal sequencing of action. And so I think he's trying to say a little bit more about the divide between war and peace, which we will talk about a little bit as we analyze some of these key passages that I've marked for us. And the other side of that is, what are the similarities between war and peace? And what are the similarities between society and battle? If you take a look at the opening scene of Anna Pavlovna's party, I think you will see that there are actually more than expected, a more than expected number of comparisons that you can draw between some of these characters who would say condescending things to their wives or the other women at the parties, and then kind of go do their own version of those exact things in battle. So I think it's pretty funny, and I think these are important things to look out for.
Right. And we also see, following that line of thought, not only reflections of the behaviors of men in society and men in battle, you also see some of the same characters going from society to battle.
Right.
Obviously, the most important two, of course, are Nikolai and Andrei, but also Dolokhov, as well as a couple other characters whose names escape me at the moment.
So I think one example of the sort of rules of the military and the rules of society, maybe, that you could point out is just this opening scene where Kutuzov is coming to inspect the troops, and they basically spend all night focusing on how they look, how they're dressed, how they're presented, only to, at the last minute, decide, never mind, we need to change it all back and look bad, just to show that we were, marching far and long and whatnot. And so there's this sort of ordered confusion in a lot of ways of military life and of regiment life. And you can see that clearly when they're discussing the army and its uniforms. And as the inspection goes on, there are just these very minor things that will kind of set somebody over the edge when they're inspecting it, like buttons not being polished or the sword not being adjusted exactly right. And these are kind of in similar veins. You can kind of see some of this in society as well. A lot of what is deemed important it's just constructed, really, and the rules of warfare and the rules of society they're just constructs. They're really not necessarily meaningful on their own, but they're things that constrict us, and they might motivate people to act certain ways and do certain things, for instance.
I would say, and I think the parallel here to your point is strengthened by looking at it just from a societal perspective. You might look at it either as someone from that society is looking back on it and they talk about all the particulars and you're like, well, yeah, of course, that's how it is. But now recontextualize into warfare where they're like, you might say, why are we going into parade, marching gear, and all those nice things? And to your point about like, it's just because of the expectation. Slightly recontextualizing it shows, brings out a lot of the army stuff is ridiculous. It's funny, and that the ridiculousness of it highlights, to your point, its counterparts in society in a way that recontextualizing it brings those questions and makes it funny and makes it ridiculous in a way that it doesn't in its quote unquote natural environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the ways that you can see this again is through Dolokhov, because, like you mentioned, he is the one that gets kind of the brunt of the bear incident. The He gets the brunt of the bear incident's punishments, basically by being demoted to private. And there's a moment during the inspection when Dolokhov is looking at the commander in chief, and the narrator writes that Dolokhov's clear blue eyes gazed at the commander in chief as boldly as they had gazed at the regimental commander. Their expressions seemed to tear aside the veil of convention that placed so great a distance between a commander in chief and a private. And so Tolstoy, of course, is aware of the fact that the military is kind of ridiculous in its conventions and whatnot. Having served in the military himself, he is quite aware of this, and he's quite aware of how battle works and how the conventions of warfare are supposed to be used and fought and whatnot. And so the fact that the convention of rank can be destroyed just by the way somebody looks at another person is fascinating, I think. And it also points to the fact that in war, not so much in society, but war specifically has this tendency to shake up existing social orders, because you're just getting so many people together in such a chaotic situation that there are moments that cannot happen anywhere else, perhaps. And we'll see some of these as we go later on. But I think just now I wanted to make a note of that, as well as a note of the way that eyes in Tolstoy's writing can be used to convey ethical meaning throughout the novel. That's something that is used a lot in Anna Karenina, but it's also used in War and Peace. So if you see eyes mentioned, you might want to make a note of it. It's probably important.
Yeah, and kind of moving from there, I also want to talk specifically about Andrei. Andrei is our most consistent character accompaniment, and of course, now we are recontextualizing Andrei from his rather unhappy life in Petersburg and Moscow society to him being out in the battlefield, and for the most part, being just like ready. He loves it. He's happy. At least feels that he's happy and feels fulfilled in the way that he doesn't elsewhere. Being an adjutant to Kutuzov and just running around, bringing around notes, wanting to get into battle himself. And it's right. I mean, with the sole exception of a couple instances when he early on snaps at Zhirkov, when his mood suddenly squashed by his reception in Brune. So it's not it's happy when he's moving away from the particulars of life and just getting into, all right, combat, I can do that, but getting back into people having fun, the intricacies of core life, it's uneven again.
I think that he's really a positive character because he's one of the few people that's able to maintain their cool in battle. And he does a lot of positive things for his regiment. You mentioned at the end when he goes down to help the artillery men at their cannons, and he's helping them haul them away so they don't get captured by the French. And this is something that is kind of criticized later when they're having their little debrief because they didn't disable all the cannons or they weren't able to get them all away. But what's failed to mention, what is failed to be mentioned in this debrief is the fact that most of the people had died, and Andrei was really just kind of slugging it out. And the outcome was a lot better than it would have been had he not been there. And his foil is, of course, Nikolai, as you mentioned, who is basically a coward in every instance that you could imagine in war. And that to me is relatable because I think if I was in the military, I would also be a coward or a deserter. Because I don't see myself being very good in the
military. Yeah, I think maybe you can also kind of draw attention to. So, in your example, when the commander Tushin of the artillery is being criticized, they say Kutuzov is telling him, why didn't you take the second cannon? All right, one's gone, fine, but the second one, you should have had time to take that. Well, what about your covering? The men who are supposed to cover you, and Tushin doesn't want to tell the commander because he's got this romantic sense. He hates being criticized, and he doesn't want to throw other regiments under the bus. So he doesn't want to tell them, no, we were abandoned by the people who were supposed to protect us. It was just us. That's why we're dying, so many. And he just stands there in silence for a whole minute. It's very awkward. And then Andrei leans in and says, of course, Your Excellency, I was there. There were no men to cover them 2/3 of them were dead. 2/3 of their horses were dead. Tushin did admirably under these circumstances, and arguably it's up to him that we carried the battle. So not only does he pull him out, but he recontextualizes him for Kutuzov as a hero. I think you can roughly look at that versus Nikolai's experience with sort of fighting the chain of command, which goes a little bit differently because, well, we see Andrei sort of subverting hierarchy through, I guess you can call it, attracting flies through honey. He's working the system to achieve his outcomes. Nikolai sees the theft and wants to get the money back for his friend, and he goes to the staff officers and not staff, just the officers mess hall, and accuses the guy in front of everyone. You stole the wallet. You should give it back. And in the end, once the guy gives him the money back, he kind of is disgusted and even throws it back at the guy, which is not. I mean, at that point, you've got the money back. Just keep it.
Right.
But
right.
And then he's pressured into apologizing. So in their own ways, they try to stand up to injustices they see, and Nikolai's is passionate but ineffectual, and to your point, shows you like how they're both adjusting to these circumstances.
Yeah, I also wanted to make a quick note that I don't know how this is translated in every edition. However, Nikolai uses the term to give satisfaction. He says essentially when he's talking about this other officer he has upset, he uses this phrase, and what he means is to duel, which was not legal at this time, which is why a character would probably use a more indirect way of talking about dueling. I don't know if it's translated as dueling in any other books or copies, to be clear. However, wanted to make a note of that in case anybody got confused. Okay, so we can talk a little bit more about warfare.
Let's do it.
Warfare, like battle specifically, and planning, perhaps, because that is kind of the key gist of this part of book one. And one of the funniest parts, I think, was this bridge scene where they've gotten everything on the bridge, but they almost don't light the bridge and blow it up because nobody told them that they were going to have to blow it up. They only received orders to rig the bridge. And the character says, about the combustible material, you spoke to me, but about firing the bridge, you said nothing. And the reply is rightfully so. Why would we be rigging the bridge if we didn't mean to explode it? But they almost don't get it off in time. The French are almost able to come over the bridge because of the fact that they had no plan to actually set the bridge on fire and blow it up, which is kind of hilarious.
And it takes two officers to convince the commander of the Hussar regiment to do it. The first one, he's arguing with them. The second one comes in. The second one comes in and tells him, and the guy says, "Fine, I'll set it on fire," and acting as if he's the one being put as subject to unjust conditions.
Yeah. There's just a lot of miscommunication, I think, kind of across the board, and that's what makes it. That's where the comedy of the military really lies, is in this deep, fundamental misunderstanding of each other that comes out many, many different times.
Later on, you see the whole left flank and the final battle of this part almost completely dissolved just because the two commanders just can't agree. One's a mounted regiment, as I recall. The other is an infantry regiment, and so they're trying to. They have they have differences in how they want to approach fighting in the woods. Not working for either of them. Refusing to work out. They even, instead of commanding their troops right up to the front and have a pissing contest as they stand in front of gunfire.
Yeah. There's also this kind of aerial view of the war that comes out at one point where the French are convinced that the center of the action and the center of the Russian troops is at this one point kind of at the battlefield, when it's really just kind of 4 isolated cannons that are firing grape shots randomly and maybe killing people, maybe not. But the French are really convinced that that's where the center of the action is. And so this kind of gets to the earlier point that we were discussing when Andrei is talking with Bilibin, and he is criticizing Andrei for not capturing a general during the battle, which he's claiming is a success, but which Bilibin is pushing back on him, saying, "No, you didn't capture anybody, so how could it be a success?" And And then Andrei responds to him and says, "Not everything happens as one expects or with the orderliness of a parade. We had expected, as I told you, to attack their rear by 7 o'clock in the morning, but we still hadn't gotten there by 5 in the afternoon." And so this, of course, is just the beginning of everything kind of not necessarily going wrong because it was a military victory, but it's going wrong in terms of the plan. And we don't have a Tolstoy monologue here yet, but we're going to get many, 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 many more examples of this where Tolstoy is going to also explain to us how every great military commander really just kind of got lucky because their plans never really worked as they were supposed to. So what ended up happening was more or less just luck.
Right.
And that's basically what happens here. There's a series of coincidences and kind of just random chance based incidents that make it so the Russians are able to hold off the French and kind of regroup.
Mm.
And this chapter sort of ends in this sort of, I think it's a little bit of a maybe cheeky way, where next day the French did not renew their attack and the remnant of Bagration's detachment was reunited with Kutuzov's army. And so it's just this very not much with it. Like if this was in a history book, for instance, this would not be an important battle. However, if this entire sort of detachment was wiped out, that really I think would have been catastrophic. There's a lot of important people attached to it, and not to mention for Tolstoy's novel, that would have been not great either.
Yeah. To your point about the chance, of course, Bagration barely gives any orders. He just accepts what's happening and says, very good, and lets things go on their way. And the French lose the battle, as if we're to believe Andrei, who says, look, it was really the cannons that held it for us. The only reason the French didn't overtake the cannons, which they very easily could have, is because, like you said, they assumed it was the point of the battle. And they assumed, well, if that's what's holding us all back, they must be defending it like tooth and nail, right? No. The Russians, they gave up a long time ago, actually. Total
It's
luck.
just four lads firing at will, just kind of randomly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
One of them, their officer's barely even paying attention. He's just imagining heroic victories in the future. He has to be shaken out of it, and by Andrei telling him, you need to go. You're almost all dead.
I think Prince Andrei is a pretty funny character. I said that he's kind of a sort of role model military figure. He's able to keep his cool under battle, which is not something that Nikolai is able to do even close. However, there was that scene that you mentioned where the doctor and wife, or the doctor's wife, was trying to get through the road and it was blocked by all of the transports and everything. And Prince Andrei is yelling at the officers saying to let them pass, and he does, and they do, and everything is great, and the woman thinks he's her hero. However, Prince Andrei says that, or the narrator rather says that Prince Andrei has exposed him to what he dreaded more than anything in the world, ridicule, which is a really funny line to put in a part that is exclusively about being under heavy cannon fire and gunfire. He doesn't fear that, but what he fears is being ridiculed,
Right.
which it kind of points back, of course, to the differences between society and the military, and it points back to the party, because these are kind of things that are associated with society life, rumors, ridicule, dress. These are all things that play prominent and important parts of the war chapter as well. And so you get these kind of similarities that run through the two, even though we would perceive war and peace as two totally separate things that are not really related, other than the fact that they maybe both have people involved to some degree in them. Tolstoy shows us that there really are some major connecting threads that run through both of them. The people, really, and the personalities are what make them move. And the sort of chance, if you will, are also chance, if you will, is also a really major mechanism for moving these things and moving these events kind of forward. It's not necessarily a forward movement, but it is a movement of some sort. And we can talk about that more later too.
I just wanted, this wasn't a specific, I don't know if this is a broader point, but I was kind of interested and paying attention how armies are portrayed, especially after Stalingrad, of like the kind of heroism of the Red Army. And it's interesting, not interesting, I don't have that much to say about it, but just tracking the thread of how the Soul Army is portrayed.
In what sense?
Just it's that's why I don't think it's a terrible interesting point of just Tolstoy giving them the character, uneven character, and some points being like, well, they stood up heroically, but often otherwise being like, nah, these are ruffians, stealing stuff. Which
I think there's a major motivation of the army in War and Peace to get military awards, which is not really present in Stalingrad.
Mhm.
There's a much different sense of war, I think. And if you haven't listened to our Stalingrad series, you totally should if you're interested in, history, literature, etc. Wonderful series. But there's this sort of sense in Stalingrad that if they don't fight, there really is going to be nothing left. However, in War and Peace, there is notes saying, or there's a passage where the narrator notes that, well, they didn't go back for their wounded because the general just left a note and kind of entrusted them to the humaneness and fair treatment of the French, which, of course, I think generally well, actually, I don't know this, so I'm not going to say it. Tolstoy will write parts later, of course, where there are Russians who are treated fine by Napoleon and whatnot. And it's it's a different sort of enemy. It really is just kind of like an aristocrat's game, more or less. And Stalingrad, these people are really fighting for something. And here, I don't get that sense of purpose, really.
Right. Yeah. The
At least
thousands of
not
losses.
Yet. Maybe people will develop it later.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Right. Well, Kutuzov, when he deploys that regiment, to basically die before the final battle, and says, if 1/10 of them come back, I'll be happy. It's a tactical calculation. It's the officers broadly are I mean, not the soldiers aren't getting that, but just officers' way of looking at things. You've got the officers who are important, more or less, and then you got your soldiers who are your currency.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's different when you have so many people that this is their career and they're just kind of careerists and they're not really in the midst of the battle. They're more or less safe. At least a lot of these officers are they're back, they're running messages. Not everybody is on the front line. Whereas I think in Stalingrad, you do have this impending sense of doom where everything is becoming the front line. And that's a much different sense of urgency and motivation that you have.
Yeah. Yeah. But
so it's interesting to track for sure.
Yeah, it is. That's about all I had.
Yeah, I have more, but I'm going to save it for our Patreon-only book club because otherwise we're going to take too long and this episode is never going to get edited.
Classic.
But before we totally wrap up, Cameron, I got to ask you on a scale of 1 to whoever you choose.
Sure.
How buzzed up on caffeine are you? How alert do you feel?
I have only had 1 cup of coffee, so it hasn't hit yet. Usually I try to shoot for 2 or 3 before I start getting the peak of feeling awake, and you just breathe out through the day. Yep. Yeah. How about you? Do you feel stronger? Do you feel ready to
I feel my digestive tract kicking into overdrive with everything in my kefir, so I am ready to go. I see why this was the diet. If I ever get sick again, I will move exclusively to kefir and or Koumiss. Let me know if anyone's tried that in the comments. I really hope you haven't. Probably isn't great, but I don't know for sure.
Great. Well, I'm gonna slightly transition what we have on our script here. I'm not gonna ask you what we have next episode because I think our audience is smart enough to figure it out. Next time we're reading part 3 of book 1 of War and Peace. So follow along from here, about another 100 pages if you are reading with us.
And you should be reading with us. And if you are reading with us, also click the link in our bio and in our show notes to join our Discord. We've got a War and Peace channel there where you can talk to all of the other Tolstoy lovers and Tolstoy readers that are going to be reading along with us. We've got a really good group, so I'm excited to continue on with this.
The music used in this episode was Soviet March by Toasted Tomatoes. You can find more of their stuff on toastedtomatoes.bandcamp.com and on YouTube under the same username. If you're looking for other places to join us, you can also follow us on Instagram at Tipsy Tolstoy Podcast, on Twitter at Tipsy Tolstoy, or join our email list on our website, tipsytolstoy.com.
You'll hear from us again soon.